Suzanne, welcome to our podcast. It's such a delight to have you here. I'm so excited for this conversation and to hear your story and your wisdom and experience from the perspective of being a mother of four and a midwife. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Claire. It's a real honour to be able to speak into my experiences, my kind of part of my journey of midwifery and my future journey into midwifery. And yeah, of course, it is woven into my whole parenting dialogue, which is also pretty close to the same period of time that I've been a midwife. So yeah, I guess if I sort of started off, I would say my first part of my introduction to birth was around having my own children. There was a funny little story that kind of happened before that. Like literally there's no one in my family who has anything to do with healthcare or birthing. And I was way back in my 20s, sitting outside in a vehicle outside North Shore Hospital, and completely from nowhere, a thought came into my mind, I want to be a midwife. And it was such, to me, an absurd thought that I dismissed it like immediately. But I always remembered it because it was one of those really strong moments when something that might have meant something, but you couldn't make any sense of happens. And then, of course, the next step for me was that I had my first baby back in 1988. So that was my first introduction to the world of birth. And it was the birth of that baby that really started to get my thinking around becoming a midwife. But I didn't action on it at that stage. I had my second baby 21 months later. And it was after her birth that things were changing in the world, and we were going from having to be a nurse registered first, who then went on to do midwifery, to this new program, which was the direct entry midwifery program. And that made sense to me. My thinking was, I don't want to look after sick people. I want to look after healthy women having babies. And so I just want to do midwifery. And because I birthed my second baby at home, by this stage I was looking at normal home birth, healthy birth, etc. And in between that period of time before I started training, I had already started doing a bit of activism. Like I've got an old picture of me in Birkenhead bannering for home birth.
Awesome.
And I started running. Back in those days, we didn't really have classes for childbirth educators. So myself and others were running birthing education classes, like let's do this for women and let's make this the most empowering experience we can for women, and birthing at home was part of that. That was my early journey. And then I did my midwifery training and registered in 1995. And my goal back then was that, I was out there to protect women. I was worrying, if there's such a word, for women. And I was hoping that we were going to have many women birth at home, because to me, it was natural. And I really came from that anthroposophical view right from the beginning, that the body wisdom was within the woman's body, and that the less we interfered with her and the more that we allowed her to empower herself, the more that she would, be able to do this naturally.
Oh, we still need your words. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. Perfect. So you really were at that forefront of this movement into the acceptance of more natural birth and home birth. And there's still kind of a lot of battles that parents go through, less so in New Zealand than other places, thankfully, in the world. But thank you for being one of the early voices of that, because it's just such a gift for people to have that choice now.
Yeah, and there's not so many midwives who were around at the time that I was around who were still practicing. So some are, but we don't have a lot of that group still here. So it's another part of what pushes me forward and makes me feel that even though now I'm somewhat reducing some of my midwifery practical skill or clinical skill work, and I say somewhat because I've got some ideas in mind that I'm actually going to be doing a little more than I thought I was, but that I don't want that knowledge lost. Like I came to this understanding when I was overseas a couple of years ago, that I'd really come into my own wise woman. It's kind of like I don't want to use the word elder years, but you get to that part where you say, I have this behind me and this knowledge can't be lost, and this wisdom can't be just retired. Like it's got to be used. So it's kind of like that the wise woman birth keeper knowledge that I want to take forward.
So important.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And along the way, you know, there's many stages when I've thought, you know, the most important part is this, or the most important part is that. You know, there was a time when for me it was like, well, prenatal and birth are the most important. And then, you know, you start to realize, well, actually postnatal is really important. And then you realize the whole lot of them are important. And you come through to recognize actually all of them are significant thresholds, you know, that we cross. And I wouldn't have thought that in the beginning. You know, this has been my own evolution of realizing actually the minute we get pregnant, we've crossed this significant threshold and we've come into this, what I've now known and can term as this liminal space in the betwixt and between of like, I'm not the woman who wasn't pregnant, but I'm not a mother yet and I haven't birthed yet. So I'm in this kind of space, and that's the only place you should be when you are pregnant. And even in that stage, it's broken into 3 parts. And, you know, then we're looking at the first and the second and the third trimesters, and they're all so different. And then we go into labor and birth, and we cross this next threshold, which is dynamic and deeply needing every part of us to come into play in that moment. And then the minute we give birth, we've crossed another threshold and we've completely come into the matrescence. And that is even, you know, we talk about matrescence often as being the first 42 days. But if you look at cultures overseas, they're like, oh, no, it's at least the first year. And it goes on from there. Yeah, and it goes on from there. Yes. So, and then I started to think, oh, but hold on, we've missed out what happens before we get pregnant. What about that space where we start to conceive of the idea, and I think I'd like a baby, but I haven't yet consciously started trying. And what's that about? It's like a vacant space that hasn't really been engaged in by most women who are considering pregnancy. They kind of get to that, I think I'm ready to have a child, I'm ready to conceive. But what about that little bit before that? And then that bit that's after the like, I've prepared myself for the idea of conception and now I'm actively trying, or I'm actively opening myself to be available to receive a pregnancy. And that is an area now that I think, gosh, this is also vitally important, because what we do before is we are creating the bed of wellness for mother and baby.
Yes, that foundational piece is just so important, isn't it? On so many levels, the physiology, the mindset, the support. Yeah.
And, you know, we hear the word holism being used a lot, and we often think about, you know, holism means it has to be natural therapies, but actually realistically, holism is the medicine wheel of our whole well-being, regardless of what it looks like. It's the wholeness of who we are. And within that, we have these other breakdowns of parts. So there is obviously our mind and mindset, our emotional and our mental well-being. There is, of course, our physical well-being, which can be broken down from that into our physical exercise, our eating, our sleeping patterns, whether we have meditation programs or practices, whether we do things like yoga, but there's many more beyond that. You know, those often get bandied, but Tai Chi, for example, is a beautiful medium. Just dancing is amazing as a release. Other forms of creativity that are all parts of our physical, and they merge into our mental, emotional, and they merge into the other, which is that spiritual. And the spiritual part really catches people, because people get tripped up. Is it religion you're talking about? Or what do you mean by spirituality? And that sounds really non-tangible, and I don't really know how to relate to that. But it's kind of our life force. It's our essence of our being. And it's the bit that drives us forward. We are, in our uniqueness, we don't see this thing we call our soul. And yet it is us. And it is who we are. And it's the part that makes us feel into and want or not want certain things in our lives. And it's the part that makes us the beings that we are. And that changes as we transition from the woman or the young person, and we're all young, you know, I'm not going to say you're young because you've hit a certain age, but that person who was, completely about, it's me, it's my life, you know, my life is what I want to do as I want to do it. but there's a journey that you shift across as you come into being pregnant. And it's an up-leveling of responsibility, not only because we're bringing a new life into the world, but because we ourselves have to adjust how we're going to function. And are we ready for that? And have we even thought about that? And then, of course, as you go through the pregnancy and you're birthing your baby, you know, that in itself, if you were to listen to traditional practices, and I went to Peru a few years ago and I did a workshop on traditional birth, and this is where I really came to understand a truth that we hadn't really put to words in our culture. They talk about, you know, these 3 levels of cosmology of the world that we live in, and if we were looking at the lower third, this is the underworld. It's the place of the where life enters and leaves. It's a place we might go down to in serious illness or serious accidents, where we really go into the deeper part of ourselves and we withdraw and come into our cave space. And then we've got the world we live in on a day-to-day basis, which is kind of that middle strata, where we're all able to be in full flight and action, and we're very much doing our busy life. And then we've got that 3rd level, which is the spiritual level, when we sort of just completely disembody and go into our upper spiritual space. And so this bottom level is a place that women need to be in when they are in labour, and the weeks going into labour, they're going into this space. They're in there in the process of labour. They're in there in the time of matrescence, and they shouldn't be coming out of it. They should be in that space and then later come back out of it. So this is that stuff like, did I even know that before I considered a pregnancy, that these things were going to be happening for me? And if we're not aware, it's much more of a shock. And it's that I think really brings in the stresses for women and the fears and anxieties, like, what is going on? I don't understand this. And if we understand it a bit more and we're prepared, we might also have people rallied around us to support us and hold us as we're going through there. Because no, I don't believe for a minute any woman was ever designed to do this entirely by herself, unless by a situation that's well beyond our control. I think there's always should be hands on our shoulders of the people around us that we love and trust. And the trust can be as much in our professional people that we have with us as it is with the trust of our family members who have perhaps gone before us, or if they lost their wisdom. And I will say to you quite clearly, that's been very evident to me in my nearly 3 full decades of practicing as a midwife, the loss of wisdom from the elders. And I'm going to speak really out of a safety net here and say this has been the patriarchy of our medicalized obstetric system. It hasn't allowed women to feel in their own power, even generations past now. So they're a bit lost about what to offer their own women having babies now, because things were done to them. And if I was going to share a story, a very brief one, I always remember a mother of a young woman, and this would have been back in the late 90s, who said to me when she had her babies, she remembers teams of people coming into her room, doctors, who all performed vaginal cervical examinations without her consent. And then in this one story, she elicited that then in came quite a burly midwife with a needle and jabbed this in her leg, presuming it was pethidine or something like that, and then left the room. So how would these women have birth wisdom if that's how they were treated when they were birthing their babies in the 70s and 80s? And therefore, how are they going to pass on empowering knowledge to their daughters who are birthing in this era? So we've lost a generation at least of our family elders. And if their parents have died, and actually many of them were back in the Doris Gordon day, where they were given all sorts of drugs that completely phased their mind out of consciousness, pretty much. Some of these women talked about waking up and pushing a baby out. So we've probably got 2 generations at least of our elders who have no idea about the safety and sanctity of birth and the wisdom behind it.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, if we look at that history of birth, where we've come out of those those times where women had absolutely no rights in society and were treated so, it always gives me the shivers to even think about it, like the lack of respect and support. You know, it was almost the same level in society as animals, you know, and in that time there wasn't the space for support in the birthing room or support for a mother. And it's such a shame that we're still seeing the flow-on effect of that. In, you know, we're starting to reclaim some of that voice and that power within birth, thank goodness. And to thank you so much to the people like you, Suzanne, that have really, you know, brought that awareness and the need for that into the actual experience of birth. And then there's also this beautiful work now that is starting to be done and needs to be done more, is whether we need to start, women in general, you know, when we start to learn about this conversation of this whole metamorphosis that happens. I love the word that Dr. Oscar Cyrillak uses, the mothermorphosis that happens with us as we journey into and through this matrescence journey. When we can give that support, you know, to other women, when we can understand it ourselves, when the society can understand that this is such an area that needs support, that not only babies need to be held, but mothers need to be held as well, then I do believe that now is the time that we'll start to see that ripple effect of these changes also starting.
I 100% agree with you. I think I can feel this undertone that's going, we're not doing this anymore. We're going to empower. And and so this is where for me now, I think, you know, when we have the opportunity, why not start from the beginning? When women are in that place of thinking, I think I'm beginning to want to have a baby, that's a really wonderful time to engage with somebody who's got the knowledge, you know, the wisdom keepers. Like, what is it I should be doing? How could I be addressing my total wellness from the perspective of my mind and my body and my soul, and what's going to be most important to me? And again, another raw nerve here is that we are in such a busy world. Our focus is on earning a lot of money and going to work and stressing ourselves, not necessarily having enough downtime to relax and rest. And there's no small wonder that with all of that going on and the things that we're eating, some of the additives that are in our foods, our lack of decent sleep, our inability to function in a really harmonious way in our body, our rhythms in our body are out of sync. And as a result of that, our hormonal flow says this is not a good time to get pregnant. And so often it's shutting down our fertility. So now we're seeing this increasing fertility problem with women, that if they spent a bit of time trying to rebalance themselves, dropping back the demands and getting back in their own individual rhythm, actually finding out what it is and then getting into it, there's a bit of chance for a start that will conceive. And then from there, you know, what are the practices around our well-being that we must take into us in this journey before pregnancy? Because I really strongly believe and suspect that a lot of the early pregnancy discomforts would be minimized if we were in a better state before we started.
Yes.
So there's a lot that can be done here. And it also means that our partners have to be on board with this. They've got to know this. It can't just be one. So often I see women fronting up for information, but their significant partners aren't there, because it's kind of like our society's like, you'll be right, you can go off and do this. But if they don't work as a team, how is that other person going to know how to support the person who's trying to get pregnant or looking towards that?
Yes, it's so powerful when the partners come along. So I often have the dads are always encouraged and invited, and most often do come along to my classes. And it's just often at the start, they're like, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm just told to turn up, and that's okay. And I always just welcome them wherever they are on their journey, just to be there and to be open to support the mother in whatever way they can. And almost always by the end of it, it's just, I just love seeing it, because they're like, oh, now I've got the tools. I know what to do. I know how I can support you. Because that, again, birth has been disempowering for dads through generations. There was, like, my grandma with all 6 of her babies, granddad wasn't allowed in the birthing room. And that's only like 2 generations ago. And so that wisdom from men hasn't been passed on through the generations either. So absolutely the need for that support from mums from the start. And
right from the start. Yeah, there is. It's huge. And they know that's from her greater family. It's from her closest of friends. It is from herself to herself as her own gift. And clearly with her partner, I mean, they are in this together. And perhaps relationships might do a whole lot better if they start this consciously before they even conceive. They take some conscious preparation. So if they both can come into this space, they've got far more understanding about what is going on. And that's not to say, because I'm one of those people that didn't really plan my pregnancies. I wouldn't say they were completely not planned either, like they were a seed of thought. And I did have a seed of thought with all of them. And I very quickly conceived with all of them. But it wasn't actually a conscious conversation that was going on between my husband and I. It was more me giving consent to my body to go ahead, but I didn't do any preparation. I literally got pregnant and bang, I was through the door. I was on the journey.
Yes, and so was I the first time around. It was just, I was feeling nauseous and I went to the doctor and suddenly I found out that I was pregnant, and then suddenly bang, I was in it. Didn't have that time then all my fear came up about birthing, and that I didn't even realize that I was holding on to. And then while I was in it, I was processing. Luckily I had the skills myself to process and release a lot of that. But yeah, I can really see that. I mean, the way it happened, and it does sometimes just happen like that for a lot of women, though. And it doesn't pay us any service to go into any kind of blame or regret around the way a pregnancy happens. But if possible, if we are thinking about having a baby, then you are doing yourself a really amazing, you're giving yourself an amazing gift, doing yourself an amazing service by laying these foundations, starting to release already some of these stresses, looking at some of these beliefs around birthing and parenting before we're even going into it. And then also, not even just for our own journey, but then as we are gestating our babies, they are being nourished by all of our calm, happy hormones, rather than us being in this fight or flight as much as it's life. We go up and down. It's not about this perfection, but as much as possible, laying these foundations so that we can, when we are on that journey, we come to it from a really calm, centered, balanced place. And we're so much more ready mentally, emotionally, and physically for the journey, I think.
Absolutely. And if we are those people that find ourselves pregnant and go, oh gosh, hadn't really thought too much about this. The other thing is there's not a lot of access to this knowledge even at that point, like in the early weeks. And it's like those first 12 weeks, so often women are told, look, we'll just get past the first 12 weeks and then we'll start to engage a little bit more. But actually, no, this is really vital time. In fact, it's the most formative time of the baby being in the womb. It's so important that we get onto some of these things right now. If you are 5 weeks pregnant and you've found out, do it, get into it. Even yes, we understand that not all pregnancies will continue, and we're not going to just sit there going, oh, well, Russian roulette, we'll wait and see what happens and we'll kind of get there after 12, 14 weeks. I think it's realistic at that point that we go, right, this is the time to know what might be upsetting your gut. Why is your body reacting to this? What can we do right now to try and undo some of that imbalance that might be in there? And anxiety and fear, I've met many women who have had awful morning sickness until they got through the anxiety and fear. And that's what was the seed behind it.
Yes, I had the same experience with my second pregnancy, and I'd worked on my own beliefs. The morning sickness, I say with inverted commas, because it's not just the morning. And the morning sickness continued until I was really well into my second trimester, and I started looking at my beliefs. And as soon as I shifted the belief of that I had been told, if I've got morning sickness, it means I've got a healthy baby. So I was holding on to this experience of morning sickness to validate this fear of, is my baby healthy? And as soon as I let that go, boom, no more morning sickness. Yep. So you're right, it's the stress and the fear that often fuels this imbalance in our body and our system and the way we experience it. And I completely agree. If we tap into these tools right from the day that we know, even before we know that we're pregnant, even when we start to think about it, even if our baby doesn't make it to that 12-week mark, no life is ever a mistake or ever lost, or it's all purposeful, and there is so many gifts in every single moment that we are on this journey, where we can come more into this wholeness of who we are.
And realistically, what better way is it if a woman were to experience a loss than to know she is well supported by somebody who's giving her some really close attention and care? Because we've got so many stories of women who are still carrying deep, deep grief. And often women, I hear it all the time, like, I can't tell people I'm pregnant because I'm not 12 weeks. What happens if I lose the baby? And then I sit there and go, wow, so if you lose your baby, you're not going to have told anybody, and you've got no one to wrap around you. And this isn't the way for us to be, because it means I'm not important, and we are important. We need women to understand that if they have a loss, that people are going to be there to help them process that, and to help them reconsider, actually, sometimes it literally is just beyond anything we've done. It's not a guilt, it's not a blame, it's just nature sorting itself out somewhat. And if we can kind of come to an acceptance around that, that's going to make it better for us moving forward as well. So all the support for every reason should be there right from the beginning.
All the support. And I think just as you were saying that, it made me realize as well how even just telling women, don't tell anybody until you're 12 weeks, that perpetuates that mask of motherhood that we put on, like, pretend everything's fine. We just keep operating like robots in society. Don't tell anybody. And then if there is the loss, or if we are feeling even just so sick, if we can't tell anybody, then we can't get that support for whatever experience of that journey we have. And that's not just in our family home environment. It's easier to tell those people close to us, but workplaces need to be supporting women right from the start to really hold them on this journey. And that it serves the workplace, because women are powerful. They're bringing new life into the world. Let's harness that. Let's embrace that and use the power of support these women so that they can step into their power and come back into the workplace after they've gone through this matrescence journey, into really being more powerful in that workplace.
Absolutely.
In the new gifts that they've been able to acquire.
Absolutely. And it is saying to women, step into your feminine, because we've got this kind of concept that the feminine means it's our female weakness. And actually, to a degree, there's an underlying tone out there that's pretty powerful, that's saying that the feminine is weak and the female body is weak and the female body fails. And it's the blame, or the reason behind this is the individual female. And this is all dangerous narrative, and it's not founded in any truth whatsoever. The actual feminine body, men have feminine in them as much as they have masculine. And women have masculine in us as much as we have feminine. And it's how we role play these out. But when we are pregnant, to go into our feminine body and embrace ourselves and recognize our power in our feminine is really, really important. And this is part of saying, my beautiful womb is carrying this baby to do the best it can, and if everything is well lined up in terms of the hormonal balances and what the baby needs and the baby's well-being, this pregnancy is likely to continue. And I am here to protect and not only have my own body functioning as a female, but be functioning for another whole human growing and developing inside me and bringing themselves to their full term. That's a huge, I always think of it as do I use the word magic or mystery or miracle? Because every one of them covers like this. And it's such a power that women have that men don't have. It's just, let's bring it into its power. Let's let it be what it is. So embrace the feminine. It's a beautiful, beautiful state. And when else in our life should we be embracing the feminine more than in this moment?
Absolutely. Yeah. I just want to sit with that, your words for a minute, because, and just invite everybody listening to just really breathe in the power of that, and the power in shifting this narrative into coming into our own feminine strength and power and wisdom through this experience and journey of thinking about having a baby, conceiving our baby, carrying our baby, birthing our baby, and then this lifelong journey of raising this child. The very fact that we are able to do that, it's huge. And that shift in that narrative begins with us and our coming into our own power. Thank you, Suzan, for sharing that, for sharing your wisdom and your words. It's just so powerful.
Thank you. And thank you, Claire, for the honour of being able to be on this podcast with you, to be able to share that, just, the voice out into the world more and more. We need it.
We need it, yes. So where can people find you online?
So I can be found, I've got a website, wildbirthwisdom.com. I'm also I'm pretty active on Instagram. So it's wildbirthwisdom_. And on there are links into access to message me, to come onto courses with me if you wish to do that. And these are broken down so that people can say, look, I'm in that pre-pregnancy stage and I want to kind of engage in the space, or an early pregnancy or any part of pregnancy. There's discussion around labour and birth that I have with women. And a lot of that's not anything to do with the standard birth classes that are out there. It's more about the whole journey of the developing and metamorphosizing woman. And then there is work around matrescence, which is, so as you are aware, is so deep. There's so much about what we could be eating that's going to really help us replenish, re-nurture, re-nourish ourselves after birth, and the time frame that we need to do that in, and the people around us that we need to support us, and the way that we need to approach that, because it's massive. We have to consider it almost like a serious illness recuperation period. Although we're not ill, our body goes into an energetic space similar to that. So there's so much to be shared. And my wild birth wisdom is not about go to an antenatal class at 28 weeks. It's about from the moment you consider that maybe I would like to think about having a baby, right through to whenever it is that you think I am fully embracing and ready to be the mother I am. There's always space to work with women in that space.
Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing your wild birth wisdom with us.
Thank you, Claire. And thank you for everything you do.